My guest today is an author and shaman who wrote the book on North Asian shamanism. And in this interview, we're going to talk about everything I could think to ask him on the subject, including who can be a shaman, what they actually do, and some general misconceptions surrounding the practice. Allow me to introduce David Shi. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Eric Arcadian, and today I'm speaking to author and shaman David Shi. David, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have you, and I'd like to get started by just learning a little bit about you. Mm-hmm. Could you kind of give me some info on your background?
Sure. So my background is actually really interesting. I'm primarily of the Manchurian ethnicity, or Manchu, but with a mix of, some other things such as, Mongol, Chinese, Korean, a bit Central Asian as well. But the funny thing is, I actually, because my family grew up during communist times, or my family was living in communist times, I grew up very atheist. I grew up in the U.S., but with my parents' generation, that generation very much had a non-spiritual sort of outlook and perspective on life. So I was actually raised very atheist. And with me, in terms of my spiritual practice and calling, that didn't come about until a little bit later in life, when I was trying to discover more about my heritage and eventually learning about the spirits within my ancestry that were trying to work with me, that had been neglected. And it was through a series of rather fortuitous events where I was able to connect with other people from my heritage, my culture, and as well as eventually elders across Northern Asia, all of Asia really, but mostly within Northern Asia, that helps pinpoint me towards the spiritual path that in essence that I'm supposed to practice, the ones that my ancestors had used to practice before the beliefs were disrupted. So in terms of my practice, it's what I like to call North Asian shamanism, which is probably a term that only I use, because the term North Asia is not very. It's a very loose definition because there isn't a clear definition. So what I essentially refer to as North Asian is essentially Mongolia, Russian Siberia, Manchuria, bit of Central Asia, basically the peoples that, within history were often described as barbarian peoples in a way. The ones that the reasons why they had to build the Great Wall in China. So that's kind of the basis of my practice. Over the years, I was able to, as I mentioned, meet a lot of people, and from the elders and the people that I was connected to, they've given me a lot of teachings, enough for me to sort of progress in my practice. And eventually, being one of the only people in the U.S. who does this type of practice, because it's not a very widespread tradition, especially within the United States, I started to speak more at different events on different platforms. Eventually, got convinced to write a book on these traditions. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today.
Very cool. So I know the word shamanism is kind of a loaded term for a lot of folks. Could you describe in your own words what it means to be a shaman?
Sure. So the best definition within the English language that I have found is that a shaman really refers to a person who was chosen by ancestral shamanic spirits when they are born, to fulfill a responsibility as one of the mediators or the bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world, in which they are empowered to be able to do two things. One is transpossession, essentially, and the other one is spirit flight. And part of this is that they need to be able to go into repeatable, controlled, deliberate trance states to do these things. Now, within this type of definition, it's going to sound very familiar to a lot of people because these particular things are not that uncommon practices just around the world. But the key aspect isn't necessarily the function of what they do. It's the fact that they were chosen by ancestral shamanic spirits for this work when they are born, to enable them to have certain, not only just protections, but certain empowerments and certain assurances to be able to do certain work that might be considered too dangerous for someone who was not born with this relationship. But that being said, it's not a special role by any means, because what this also implies is that rather than a spiritual worker approaching spirits and gods and forming a relationship on their own organically, we are sort of born with innate relationships kind of without our consent. It's because it is with specific spirits within our ancestral bloodline. And to the extent that we have to do certain works and certain honorings with these spirits, or else we have to maintain the relationship, or else we would be punished, actually. So I would say that is one of the key differences. It is certain privileges and abilities, but at the same time, it's extra responsibilities and extra burdens. So I guess that's one of the key components of what I would consider to be a shaman versus a spirit worker in any other tradition. There is this sort of innate extra sense of burden and responsibility, to the extent that even within these cultures, finding out that someone in your family was chosen to be a shaman was actually oftentimes not considered a good thing. It was considered sometimes inconvenient, and other times it would be considered something like a curse. Especially within Korean traditions that I've noticed, that they oftentimes they actually are praying that the shamanic spirits within their ancestry won't choose a certain grandchild, so to speak. So it's in a way, I would consider that to be, again, the hallmark of a shaman. And one of the key things I've noticed around the world is that technically it's possible for someone to be born with this condition in any tradition around the world, but it's primarily within the North Asian traditions where they actually structure their entire tradition and their practice around this concept. Whereas in other cultural traditions around the world, what I have noticed is that their tradition in itself might not be a shamanic tradition, but a shaman might emerge within their lineage somewhere if they were born with this condition where, let's just say, I've noticed a case study within one of the Yoruba tribes where their priesthood, anyone can join their priesthood if they want to, they put in the work, but there are certain individuals who have to, or else they would get sick and die, but that's not the case for everyone. So in which case, I look at something like that, and I think that looks like the signs of shaman to me. So that's kind of where I would draw my strict definition, if you will. It's and another thing I will say is within the West, the term, as you mentioned, it gets thrown around rather carelessly. A lot of people like to style themselves because the word has become very sexy. So a lot of people love to use that word to describe themselves or their practice. And It depends on the situation, of course, but generally, I would say that it comes from a very different awareness of if they actually understood what the word actually meant in its original sense. And not to go into too much of a tangent, but actually within the original tribes that used the word shaman, or saman as the word was pronounced, it's actually a gendered word. It's actually specifically used to refer to the male shamans. This is primarily because of, in a sense, of Western patriarchy when they came across our peoples. The original Russian and Dutch explorers that went into Siberia, they only talked to the male shamans and they didn't talk to the female shamans. So they asked the male shamans, "What are you guys?" And they said, "Oh, shaman." And so that's the reason why the word became very popular. But the word shaman, it's used within only the Tungusic tribes within North Asia, but and all of the tribes of North Asia, they all actually have a different word for a male shaman, but all of them have very similar words for female shaman, which is utgan. And utgan, it's actually a lot more common amongst the various tribes, whereas the words for a male shaman, it could be saman, it could be buh, it could be kam or tatbe, but the word for a female shaman is actually pretty similar across all of these tribes. So if anything, the words utgan being so common, it tells us that shamanism was originally, a women-led practice. It started with the women of these traditions. The men came about later. But the word saman actually, because it's only used by the Tungusic tribes, it's a much younger word. And it's by logic, it shouldn't be the word that is so common, but it is.
Wow.
Sorry, that was a lot of stuff I covered.
I'm going to try to remember all of the questions that popped up in my head from all the stuff you just said. So starting number one, it's really interesting how you talk about it. You described it multiple times as a condition. It's almost like, and then you said some people view it as a curse. I mean, is it a heavy thing? Is it a burden that you have to bear?
It is. I mean, it's where it. I think for the people who popularized the term in the West, that's kind of where the concept of shamanic sickness comes from. It's basically this what happens when basically a young person discovers that they were chosen by spirits in this sense, and the way that the spirits would try to get your attention would often be to mess with things in your life. And so that actually manifests as something akin to a sickness that appears. And really within, if a sickness like that occurs, the only way to alleviate it is through practice, through initiation technically, but practice that will eventually lead to initiation. So yeah, it is something that we have to constantly manage. So yes, in a way, it is a burden. I will say though, it's by adhering to this practice and by properly honoring our spirits in this way, it does actually create intense fulfillment in our lives. So I do want to mention that, but it definitely does. There is a burden that is attached to it. I'm very fortunate that my spirits are a little bit more forgiving in terms of the things that I have to do. I know of some, actually, even the strictest I've heard is with Korean shamans, where their spirits actually force them to get up at the crack of dawn every single day to do morning offerings. And my spirits are much more looser than that. I still have to give offerings on a regular basis, but it can be according to my schedule. But that being said, there have been times where I haven't done offerings in a while, and they do come down on me pretty hard for that. So yes, it is. It oftentimes our work, even though our work is largely meant to serve our communities and the people around us, oftentimes a lot of our work is just, maintenance work.
So I'm getting the vibe that this is not, an open practice. Like if I came to you and I said, "Hey, David, I want to be a shaman," the answer would be like, no, right?
Well, if you said you want to be a shaman, and if that was all you said, my first response would be why? And then after that, what we would typically do is we would actually see if they're, or we would basically see what spirits were with you and around you, to then be able to sort of come up with next steps. So occasionally, people do come to us, with usually if they have some type of spirit sickness already, we would check to see what it was. If it was a shamanic spirit doing something, or if it was the equivalent of a curse that needs to be removed, we would check what it is. But yeah, either way, we generally the process is that you would have to be approached by an elder who would then sort of diagnose what the condition is exactly. And if they discover that you do have, shamanic spirits, then they can start to, slowly, teach you things, give you practices, kind of like what they did with me, that eventually leads to a proper initiation with a specific elder. But if someone doesn't have shamanic spirits, then technically they cannot be a shaman, but that doesn't mean that they can't engage in spiritual practice of some kind or another. There's many different spiritual roles out there. There's many different ways in which we can work spiritually. But the role of a shaman in the very traditional sense is there has to be that type of prerequisite. And honestly, if it turns out that someone isn't a shaman, but they can do other types of spirit work, we actually see that as we're almost a little bit envious of that. It's because to paint a little bit of a picture, because of the responsibilities and roles that I have to do with my spirits, there is a lot of different other traditions and practices that I cannot really engage in. I've been approached by spirits and gods from living in the U.S. You come across, talking with pagans, talking with people in the ATR traditions, people in various groups or covens or whatnot. There's a lot of those practices that I actually do find fascinating, but I cannot join them. I can sort of participate in them temporarily, but I cannot just initiate into one of those traditions, because that would be seen by my spirits as sort of ignoring my responsibilities and prioritizing something else. So there's a little bit of a give and take. So I guess one of the things that I want to emphasize is sort of dispelling some of the sexiness of that people may or may not have around the word shaman.
That really is quite interesting. And I'm curious how because you say like you have to go to an elder and kind of like get diagnosed and see if you have like this specific ancestry, right? How did this pan out for you? How did you discover that this was the thing that you needed to do?
So for me, it's very interesting. Without knowing, I've actually had several bouts of spirit sickness throughout my life. For me, there was a little bit of a physical component, but a lot of it was mental and psychological, to the extent that, in different stages of my life, sometimes I would just have visions. Other times I would be able to, or I would just go through, like, for example, in college, was one of the times when I had symptoms of spirit sickness, and I just couldn't concentrate on anything. I wasn't able to maintain any type of focus. Other times, a very heightened anxiety, paranoia, or basically the constant feeling of, something was, so a lot of, psychological symptoms came about. And while this was happening, I realized at some point and this was part of the dreams that I was having as well, that I had a hunger for a specific spiritual practice, but I didn't know what it was. And this is actually part of the reason how I became so acquainted with a lot of the pagan circles in the U.S. Because if I went on Google, that's what was there, and that's what I found. But then, it kept occurring through, visions and dreams and such that, it's like that stuff is cool, but it's not technically what the thing that I was supposed to be doing, especially the dreams where my ancestors actually showed up and literally was like, look us up or learn more about our history, our people's history, and to the extent where it even the message even became, look at what our neighbors did. And so look at the surrounding peoples. And it was through a series of events where I was able to come across, certain resources, and eventually getting connected with certain people and certain elders who then were able to sort of diagnose what was going on with me specifically. And as they gave me teachings and they gave me practices, and as I started practicing, a lot of the symptoms of my spirit sickness went away. A lot of the like my anxiety cooled down a lot. My paranoia pretty much disappeared. I was able to focus on things much more clearly. I wouldn't call it depression, but something similar to depression that I had went away. And, just in general, my health was able to be a little bit better managed. Some of my skin conditions became easier to manage. So just a lot of these physical, mental, psychological health things started to get better. And over time, as I continued my practice, things became a little bit easier, and also just my ability to do things, whether it's spiritual practices or other things in life, just became easier to do. So it's not a terribly exciting story, but it's a not uncommon occurrence for especially younger people nowadays whenever they do get this type of calling, because at the end of the day, our spirits just want to get our attention, to get us to be aware of what they want us to do, and they need to facilitate that in a way in which we'll be able to figure it out, even in this day and age.
So you have used a word a couple times, like towards the beginning of the conversation. I'm curious about the definition, and there's another definition I want to ask you too. So first, what is spirit flight?
Okay, so spirit flight is simply when we send our soul, or rather, where our spirits escort our soul to the spirit world to do things there. Now, this is going to sound like what most people think of in terms of a shamanic journey. And in many ways, it is very, like, conceptually, it is almost the same thing. But I would say that, within our traditions, whenever we do go into the spirit world, we don't necessarily go there to gain insight or find information. We go there because we need to do something that we can't do while in the physical world. So oftentimes when we do spirit flight and we send our soul to the spirit world, it's often to engage with spirits on their own turf. So oftentimes it's with hostile spirits, trying to bribe them or trick them or fight them even. So we don't actually, so spirit flights, it's basically like a shamanic journey if it was a lot more risk involved. So that basically is the basic definition of a spirit flight. It's we only feel comfortable doing it because of these spirits that are already with us. They are, in a sense, our escorts when we do go into the spirit world.
Okay, and then the second thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of definitions is, what is spirit sickness? Like, what are the symptoms of spirit sickness, and how would you distinguish that from something that is physical or mundane?
So the symptoms of spirit sickness really can be anything. In the past, there was, based on historical records, in the past there was a lot more physical manifestations of like of actually falling sick, of the body becoming faint, becoming very frail. But nowadays, and I talked to people in Mongolia about this, it's a lot of times it's more these days it's more psychological conditions that are more common. I guess spirits have changed; they change up their style, but it's in my case was rather light. So for people who are listening to the stuff that I described, for me it was actually very light. There are cases of people pretty close to losing their sanity. They become a lot, not just even OCD, but they almost become dissociative. They sort of lose their ability to discern between reality and visions. And in some of the most intense that I've heard, there are some elders back in the early 20th century where someone would just disappear from their village, and they would be found, weeks later, just walking around the woods naked, and they would still be like completely out of it. So it's, so basically, the signs can be anything, but basically, it's the signs are meant to be there to get your attention, and the way that you build, and oftentimes from initial evaluation, you can't be able to tell if it was a spirit sickness or if it was a mundane sickness. This is why having elders, spiritual elders, is really important. It doesn't even have to be shaman elders, but any type of spiritual elder who's trained in this will be able to, whether through divination or whether through them getting messages from their own spirits, be able to determine if this was actually a spirit sickness or if this was a mundane sickness. If it's a mundane sickness, then, medicine, physical types of, therapy or whatever. But if it's a spirit sickness, then even differentiating if it's a shamanic spirit sickness, or if this was a hostile spirit sickness, or if this was, something that you just got overloaded on spiritual pollution and just needed to go through that type of intense cleansing or not. So yeah, it's a lot of ways in which we actually deal with this is very much dependent on the role of trusted elders within the community.
That's cool. So you have mentioned hostile spirits a few times so far, and you said at one point that like you journeyed to the spirit plane to trick or bribe them or to fight them, right? So like what type of methods are you employing to accomplish these things?
What type of methods? Well, the funny thing is that there's this joke amongst students of traditional shamanism where we joke that ultimately shamanism is the spirituality of cool stuff or tools, and because a lot of what we do is actually dependent on the tools that we have. So the way that we, if we were just simply dealing with the spirit and that we're trying to bribe them, then we would basically come up with really fancy offerings to be like, to almost as a transaction, be like, I'll give you this if you don't do this, or I'll give you this if you do that other thing. But if we're tricking, or even if we need to actually engage aggressively with spirits, like through a fight or something, then having the proper tools with us is oftentimes very important. whether it's, something, I can come up with a few examples. The mirror that we have, the shamanic mirror that we wear. Sometimes our drums, actually the handles of Mongolian drums, Mongolian shaman drums, are actually in the shape of a bow and arrow. So it's actually so the drum is actually both a weapon and a shield in a way. And oftentimes we'll carry little tools with us that we can then, in the spirit world, be able to transmute into something that is a lot more effective as a weapon or a defense of some kind. When we go into the spirit world, we're often wearing the I guess regalia that we're wearing. We actually call it armor because what we wear is designed in a way to be a very heavy form of protection, where it's actually armored at various locations. And yeah, that's in a way that's kind of basically the tools that we, and of course our spirits as well. This is why it's so important for us to maintain a good relationship with the spirits that are with us, because oftentimes they can also be, allies, in the sense that they can help us either with protection or even help us with, fighting off hostile spirits.
So can you get hurt physically or mentally doing this type of work for another person if you make the right or the wrong type of move?
There are stories of shamans whose souls haven't been able to make it back to their bodies, in which case they actually do become they essentially become a lifeless person. So there's, yes, there are dangers. There are stories of shamans who almost didn't make it back. Whether it's, they were overwhelmed, or they've reached an obstacle that they weren't able to overcome. So yes, there's even times where, if we do certain works, even if we do it successfully, it'll knock us out for a few days to, a couple weeks. It is very possible to get hurt. It's very possible that we can even, if we're not careful, that we can end up just picking up stuff that attaches to our body, which is why the heavy protection that we wear is so necessary. Because someone who is less careful could actually pick up something that ends up being parasitic, for example.
Well, your tools and your armor, they sound all highly interesting. And I know we kind of chatted very briefly about the mirror that you're wearing in the pre-interview. Would you mind sharing some of those details again?
So with the mirror is basically our most base level of protection. It is, like all of our tools, it is considered a living object in which we actually have one of our spirits reside in these objects. So in this mirror as well. But the mirror is a very versatile tool. It's pretty much used by almost every single, actually not like just about every single tribe within North Asia. If anything, it's one of the identifiers of a North Asian shamanic practitioner. The mirror can act as it can store any extra blessings or energy that we don't immediately use, so that we can use later. So in a way, like a spiritual battery, it can transfer energy and blessings onto other people. We can use the mirror for divination. If we notice something that's stuck onto another person, a harmful attachment or even a harmful spirit, we can actually use the mirror for extraction as well. And I guess that's one of the tools that we use, where the mirror can actually serve as a spirit trap as well. And so it's one of our most versatile tools that we have. It's something that we commonly use first before anything else. And they're typically made out of copper or bronze, along with some other metals, depending on, the tradition and purpose for which it was made. So it's, so that's kind of the way that works. When we do wear our other armor, this mirror does go on top. The other armor that the full armor that we wear has various metal cones and plates at various parts of the body that require extra protection, especially on the back, because we can't see our back, so that's considered to be one of our blind spots. So the back tends to be more heavily armored, as well as other things that might actually help make it easier for our spirits to enter our body, for any if they need to if we need to bring them in. So yeah, I think that's a basic description of some of the tools that we have.
Yeah, I love that. I love the versatility of the mirror, and I think like what I really find so fascinating about it is that it's like an actionable tool. Like you can do something with it. It can protect you. Almost the way you talk about it, it's almost like you could fight with it, almost like it's a weapon. But then at the same time, you can like sit back and use it for scrying and divination. It's just like it does all the things. It's really cool. It's really cool.
And because there is a spirit in there, sometimes it does things without even me noticing. There was this one time where I was actually asked to do a house blessing for a friend of mine, and I showed up and I just did a little bit careless, but I wasn't planning to do heavy spiritual work, so I was just blessing, whatever. But then about a week later, I did notice that the mirror, actually I didn't notice, my elder noticed that the mirror had actually captured a ghost from the house. That was it wasn't like a harmful or evil ghost by any means, but it was a ghost that was just, its presence there was causing problems. So my mirror had trapped it, and I didn't even know it had done that. So then when I did notice, then I, had to, release it and, do other follow-up work. But yeah, it as a living object, it sometimes does things on its own, and I don't even notice until later.
Wow. So all of this knowledge and experience that you've acquired over the years has basically, you've tried to condense that down into a book, right? Spirit Voices. And I'm curious, like what was the process like for you of writing that book and distilling all that information?
That's a very interesting question, because ultimately, before I even agreed to write the book, I actually did have to get permission from the elders that I was working with, because so much of what we practice is considered sensitive or even secret information. So I had to get permission and be advised to be very careful about what I write and how I write it. So a lot of the things that I write about, this is one of the reasons why with the book I talk about so many different tribes and traditions, because in a way it's a good way to serve as a broad introduction to North Asian shamanic practices as a whole without going too in depth into any one tradition. And that was definitely intentional, because most academic works most works, academic or not, that exist do go very in-depth into one particular tradition or practice, to the degree that, forget anyone who's not a familiar, even with me when I read it, goes over my head sometimes, because it's just so thick and in-depth, and sometimes just like very academic wording. So when I wrote my book, I meant it to be a broad introduction that experienced practitioners can still get something out of, but it's for people who read it and have interest in it. They can then use that as sort of a jumping off point to go into any other specific thing that they might want to get into. But it's I explore, I think it was like 11 different like tribes of practice, all of which are very similar. The thing with North Asian shamanism is that foundationally, they're all very, very similar to each other. It's just when you get into the different tribes within the different regions, then you start to get regional differences based off like differences in the land spirits and what they want. So then accommodations have to be made to work with those particular land spirits. As well as just over time, different tribes develop different identities, like cultural identities. And our spirits, when they want us to do certain works with them, it's from that cultural context. So in a sense, it was very interesting. It was humbling because when I did show the manuscript to my elders, and the amount of red pen work they did across the entire manuscript was very humbling for me. Being like, oh, I actually don't know as much as I think I did. But yeah, overall, it was a good experience. It actually helped. It helped me to better sort of consolidate everything that I've learned and be able to give it a little bit more of a concrete structure. So yeah, it was definitely a learning process for me. But overall, I do hope the book is still, it has a lot of historical and cultural context into it, but I did include some practical concepts and practical techniques as well that I believe that people who are not within our traditions can still incorporate into their own practice to enhance their own practices as well. You mentioned at the beginning that yes, it is to an extent these are closed traditions, but we do have a lot of concepts and practices that are open. That not only do we think anyone can do them, some of them we think everyone should do them just for spiritual hygiene, if nothing else.
I find that very interesting, and I'm glad that you brought that up because what I was about to ask you, I think it's so fascinating that like you have talked about it kind of being a closed practice. You said that you were only allowed to talk about certain things when you write the book. And then at the same time, you are writing this book for the general population to read about the practice, right? So I'm thinking like, if somebody is reading about what you do and they find it interesting and they try to imitate it, like, is that wrong because it's a closed practice? But you say that there are certain things that you have put out there that you think kind of everybody should do for their own, even for their own spiritual hygiene.
Yeah, and this was a balance that I had to tread delicately. I do talk about some closed practices, but only in the sense of describing what they look like. So it'd be very difficult for someone to actually be able to imitate it, because oftentimes, when we have practices that are closed, the reason why they're closed is for safety issues more than anything else. Certain practices are closed because we believe it would be too dangerous for people who are not within the tradition to be, or who are not born with the shamanic conditions to be able to do. But that being said, our open practices we consider to be safe for everyone, and actually helps, if nothing else, helps ensure spiritual safety for people to do. So the way that we do cleansings, the way that we do protection work, the types of spiritual pollutions that we've identified that we believe people should be on the lookout for, as well as, just even working with land spirits. And I think this is something that gets overlooked very frequently. Now I'm seeing more and more people talk about it, about the concept now, which is great. But a sort of an open secret, because it's kind of a secret, but not really, is that in our belief system, the reason why we work so close with ancestral spirits is because ancestral spirits help link us with the divine, ultimately. And one of the reasons why we do shamanism the way we do is because our divinities are not as available to us as they are in other cultures and traditions. Basically, our gods are less available, to the fact that we barely even know them, who they are anymore. So we work with spirits to help sort of link us, ancestral spirits to link us to them. But then how do we better connect with ancestral spirits? this is where working with land spirits and having a relationship with land spirits is really important, because land spirits are the only spirits that are indigenous to the middle world or the physical world. And so because of that, they can become a great mediator or facilitator of helping us to connect with ancestral spirits. And so one thing that I actually do encourage everyone, no matter what they practice, is to build a relationship with the land spirits, because even in their own practice, we believe that within their own tradition of practice, their relationships and their connections with what they've already been working with will get much stronger. So it's concepts like that, as well as, specifically how we see land spirits, how we sort of define them, the considerations with them, the specific herbs that we use for cleansings as well, and even some of the specific ways that we do offerings and other rituals. I do include a prayer ritual, because we believe everyone should pray. But the way that we do prayer rituals is, one thing that North Asian people, especially Mongols, like to pride themselves on is that their practices are practical. And I use air quotes in that we basically try to find the easiest way to do anything and everything, removing the complexities of as long as it works. So the way that we do our prayer and offering rituals is that we pretty much do everything all at once. All spirits, all the entities that work with, we design it so that it's just boom, all at once, as opposed to a different ritual for each type of spirit. As well as the way that we do a fire ceremony, which is kind of our default for if we want to do anything, in terms of anything that is pretty much for any spiritual purpose. It can be something for really simple or really complicated. So our default is just do a fire ritual. So I do include some techniques, some instructions for that as well, because it can be really useful it can be a really useful option, as well as a tool for people in other traditions as well, to incorporate into their own practice. What I will say, though, is sometimes, because we kind of use a fire ritual for everything, this is where I kind of appreciate the experience I have with, Western witchcraft practices, where sometimes I can just probably light a candle and do some things on the candle, and that'll be enough. Whereas in the traditional way for us, I would rather not do a full fire ritual for that.
That's really interesting. Well, I can definitely vouch for the usefulness of having relationships with the land spirits around you. I mean, there's 101 reasons why that's a good idea. But I actually look forward to grabbing a copy of your book when I can, and kind of hearing more on your perspective as to why those spirit relationships are important, and finding a little bit more about those details of your practice that you put out for everybody. Now, you're going to be at Summer Magick Fest later this year. Yep. You're one of the headliners. What can we expect from some of your workshops? What will you be teaching us?
So this is actually very timely based on our conversations. So I will be teaching 2 different classes. One is basically the same title as my book, and that is just a broad introduction to North Asian shamanism as a whole. It's in a way, it's a very condensed aspect of my book, in a sense, where I kind of just broadly introduce the cultures, the traditions, some of our basic concepts as well. And then the second class is actually dedicated to land spirits. Specific ways of how we consider land spirits, the way how we view them, how we would sort of just, in a way, not only just identify them, but being able to better understand, why we consider them the way they do, what their personalities are like, what they tend to be, what makes them distinct from any other types of spirits, the way that they should be worked with, as well as sort of an example of the way that I would work with them, the type of prayer that I would do, which is very interesting. The funny thing with land spirits is that this might be a Buddhist influence within North Asia, but we consider land spirits technically to be below humans in the human souls in hierarchy, but they are also far more powerful than humans are. So we don't want to treat them like they're lower than us, because they can mess with us in a lot more ways. But if we do have a positive relationship with them, it actually becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. They help us with they help us with our spiritual developments, and then we can, and then the things that we do with them can be beneficial for them as well. It's basically the relationship. Without spilling too much of what I'm talking about, it's a lot of times it's being a good neighbor relationship, and to the degree that, like when we do rituals with them, we're basically doing trade-offs with them, but we're not technically worshiping them.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that sounds really interesting. I'm definitely looking forward to being a part of that workshop later this year. And in just a second, I'm going to ask you the signature question. But before I do that, I do want to kind of open it up here and hear from you. If somebody's looking to find you, how can they get a hold of you online, or maybe other festivals where they might be able to find you at in person later this year?
Yeah, so probably Instagram is sort of the best avenue to find me. My handle is David, I should spell it out, DAVIDJSHI311. I am on Facebook, but I don't post there too often anymore. It's kind of, for any of my spiritual content, it tends to be more on the Instagram side. And so that's the primary way people can find me online. In terms of festivals, I have a bunch of festivals lined up, actually, that I'll be appearing at. Summer Magick Festival, which I believe is in June. And next month, I'm actually going to be in Oregon at a new festival there called Spirit Northwest. It's by it's hosted by another podcast called That Witch Life. So that's next month, and then later I will also be doing Harvest Gathering in Connecticut, as well as Temple Fest in Massachusetts. And that's the things that have been confirmed so far for this year. But as a general thing, one of my regulars, and this already happened this year, but for next year, one of my regular go-tos is actually Convocation in the Detroit area. So I'll probably be going to that. This year, about a month ago, I was at Sacred Space. And so that's something that I will probably appear again. Though next year, Convocation and Sacred Space are the same weekend, so I have to figure out which one to go to. But yeah, so those are the things that I have sort of lined up.
Okay, very cool. So I'm going to gather those social links. I'll gather the festival links as well. And of course, the link to your book. And I will put those all in the video description below. So if anybody's looking for more information about David, all they have to do is click below and you'll find all the stuff that you're looking for. So, David, it is signature question time. How do you use sound or music in your personal magical practice?
So we actually we use two instruments primarily within our tradition, the drum and the jaw harp. And the funny thing is we actually do use them in very similar ways, because those are instruments where the vibrations actually do work very well with our spirits, and that they can actually help call the spirits to us. And the reason why we use generally we use the jaw harp more than the drum nowadays, mainly because it's so much easier to carry around than a drum. One of the ways in which we are practical, we only use the drum for sort of the heavier ceremonies, but for anything else, we would rather use the jaw harp. When I was younger, I preferred the drum because it looked cooler, but over time, as I got older, I'm like, all right, I'm going to use the easier one. And the way that we use the drum or the jaw harp is that we usually start off, when we call our spirits, we start off with a rhythm that's almost kind of like imitating the rhythm of a galloping horse in a way. So that way it basically helps facilitate our spirits when they arrive. But ultimately, when we do work with any of our spirits, if any of them do come and enter us, then the way that we actually incorporate sound is that every spirit has its own song. And if you ask me to sing any one of their songs, I can't for the life of me, because it almost becomes, when I'm in that trance state, it almost becomes a muscle memory where it just comes out and it plays. And every spirit's song, it's unique to each single spirit. And then the words that we sing, it's almost like a freestyle kind of singing, but it's basically in many ways descriptions of the spirits themselves, as well as any difficulties that they had in life, basically things that identified them, the joys that they had, the sorrows that they've had. So, and the reason why these songs are important is because they ultimately they are a very key important step for us to be able to fully integrate with them and to be able to work with them for the connection to be complete. So ultimately, we start with either the drum or the jaw harp. We start off with a very basic rhythmic sound, but then it becomes something that's going to sound erratic to other people, because then it changes into something that is unique to that spirit, and that's what we would refer to as the spirit song. And then there's also other sound effects that we do as well. It's not uncommon for when a shaman reaches full possession that they'll do some type of exclamation sound, whether it's like a wolf howl or if it's a bird chirp, or sometimes even like a very loud dawn, to basically indicate that the possession has stabilized. But yes, ultimately, sound does become a very important aspect of what we do, and if nothing, and not only just with our own spirit. Sometimes even when we're using the drum and the jaw harp, it also, in a way, calls out to other spirits that we would like to work with. So just to get their attention, to make them available. It's not too dissimilar from in Shinto temples, or shrines rather, when people ring bells and gongs to get the spirit's attention. It's a very similar concept for the way that we would do it. I don't know if that answers your question enough.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's really beautiful that the way you describe it, as to like each spirit has their own song. And I think it's really interesting how you connect to that. And like, okay, so just, I know what a jaw harp is and I know what a drum is, but not everybody knows what a jaw harp is. So for people who have not heard of that instrument before, can you describe how it works and how you play it?
Sure. So actually, I think it'd be easier to just show. Let me
that would be perfect.
Out, actually. All right. So mine is actually attached to a bundle, but essentially this is what it is. Basically, it's a metallic, like small instrument with a metal tongue in the middle. So the way that we would actually play it, I'm not going to play too much, or I would get into a trance, but... That's basically what it sounds like. And it's actually pretty universal within Northern Asia. I think in parts of Europe, it's also pretty common as well. But basically, it's, as you can tell, it's a very portable instrument. But basically, we pluck what we call the tongue, and it basically vibrates within our mouth, so that the vibration then creates that twanging sound to it. And again, we use it pretty much the exact same way that we would use a drum.
Yeah, that's so cool. I really appreciate you not only sharing, but also demonstrating, because I think, picture's worth 1,000 words. So that's really cool. Thank you, David. I think we are kind of getting to the end of our time here, so I will go ahead and end our call. But I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to be here and to share this cool stuff with me. And I can't wait to see you later this year at Summer Magick.
Great. Right. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
See ya. What a great interview, and another big M3 thank you to David Shih for taking the time to be with me on the show today. If you haven't already checked out his book, Spirit Voices, be sure to grab a copy. Tons of links will be in the video description below, including one to Summer Magick Fest 2025, where you can see David and me in person later this year. One quick favor, please make sure that you like and subscribe here on YouTube, maybe even drop a comment. It's a small gesture, but it makes a huge difference to me. You can also follow me on social media at Eric Arcadian, but if you really want to help support me making more content in the future, please check out my Patreon page. Patrons get access to these interviews before anyone else, plus some other cool content as well. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.